Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Budget Witch, and today we are continuing where we left off with my story about how I found Wicca and the whole witchcraft deal. As I mentioned before, when I start looking into something, I become super obsessed with it, and even though I had access to a computer somewhat, I still wanted to have more resources because what I was able to find online at the time was super limited. Nowadays, you can find information everywhere, from Google to websites to blogs to Tumblr to Instagram, even Amino. I'm on 2 of them dedicated to witchcraft, and it's just amazing the resources that they have now versus when I was 15 years old. So my resources were pretty limited, but I did find that in the book section, way back in the back where the religious texts were, there was this thing called New Age religion. And in the New Age religion section, they had at least 10 books, all dedicated to different forms of paganism, from Satanism to Druidism to a grimoire for warlocks to witchcraft. And you could also find some random stuff on like astrology and whatnot. And sure enough, in that section, I ended up finding this massive book, and it was called Raymond Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, the extended version. And I had kind of read about this book online. I had heard that it was the go-to source. And this book, being as massive as it was, it had everything. Pictures, diagrams, it had questions in the back that you had to answer after doing the lessons. It was literally like a school book. And I thought to myself, what better way to learn about witchcraft than to actually study it as if I'm going to school for it? And so I decided to pick up this book. Now, I'll later do a review for this book in my channel. That's part of the reason why I want to have this channel, so that I can show you what resources I think are good, what ones I think are not so good, and just the pros and cons. Anyways, when I picked up this book, I decided that I was going to start taking it to school. And I don't know why I decided taking it to school was a good idea. I felt like at the time it was because I couldn't read it at home. My mom at this point still had no idea that I was into witchcraft or that I was even looking into witchcraft. I had tried to breach the subject with her, but it didn't go over well. My father was a lot more, I guess he allowed a lot more. Because he had come out as an atheist, he believed that I had the right to choose my own path. And while he personally didn't believe in religion, he did believe in kind of doing your research and learning things as you go. And so he decided that it was probably a good idea that I had these resources available to me. And so he ended up buying me the book. And it wasn't cheap either at the time. It was at least $25. So what ended up happening was I decided I was going to take it to school, because at school I would have the freedom to read it as I wished. I had a lot of downtime in high school, and I had a lot of time just in general to kind of flip through it and look at it and really be able to have it out in the open. And at the time I wasn't thinking about the consequences of such actions. I wasn't thinking about the fact that a lot of people would give me stares, or that a lot of people would start whispering behind my back. I kind of expected a few people would get angry and say that it was the work of the devil. A couple of my friends were actually concerned that I was carrying it around. Some of my friends actually became curious, and I decided that I was going to try and educate them as best as I could on the matter, to try and get rid of those false ideas of what witches do. But the one thing I really didn't count on was my crush, the woman who had introduced me to witchcraft, who would look at this book and decide that I was being a poser, or that I was a fake. Back when I was in high school, everything was a trend. Even coming out as being a homosexual or bisexual was a trend. So when I finally was like, oh, I like women, nobody believed me, because they felt like it was just a phase and a trend, and that I was just trying to be popular. And the witchcraft thing, supposedly, like, it was no different. I wasn't the only one that had found New Age religion and had decided it was the hip and cool thing to do. Granted, I was actually looking for religious enlightenment, whereas other people were just like, oh, it's so edgy, oh, it's so rebellious. So the book didn't go over as well as I thought it would. I thought it would actually prompt people to ask questions, and I thought it would actually prompt my crush to actually be proud of me that I was trying to research this and that I was trying to be thorough in what I was doing. But instead, it brought a lot of angry reactions from people saying that I shouldn't carry it around school, that I shouldn't be able to read it out in the open. I was told that it was a distraction, and of course I was told that I was being a fake. So that was a thing. On another note, it did actually teach me a lot about witchcraft, though. The book itself was actually highly informative, and I was breezing through lessons every single week. I was writing in a journal, which is now my old book of mirrors. I was writing in it, I was learning the lessons, I was picking up on the rules, the principles of belief, the ordains, the Wiccan Rede, all of it. I was absorbing it like a sponge. And then came the point in the book where I ran out of resources, or where I ran out of things that I could do as the solitary practitioner. While the complete book of witchcraft actually was the complete book of witchcraft, what I didn't really understand was that there's a huge difference between the things that you do as a solitary practitioner versus the things that you do if you're within a coven. Now, for those that may not know, a coven is a group of witches. It is a congregation of witches. It's an organized group of them that go and do rituals together, that celebrate the holidays together, and it's generally a lot more formal than anything you would do as a solitary practitioner or a solitary witch. Now, Raymond Buckland's book follows the path of Celtic Wicca, and it's actually pretty formal and pretty specific. The types of ingredients and resources that you need is very proper, very ceremonial, and I'll explain that whenever I do my review. But as I was blowing through these lessons, I realized that I was quickly running out of, chapters that I could do without having to find all these crazy resources and do all these crazy things that as a solitary practitioner or a solitary witch, it would be impossible. And then sure enough, I ran into a section where I could not continue the lessons because I was not part of a coven. This section of the book basically told me that I had to find a group that I could be in, and then I had to do these lessons on top of whatever lessons the coven was teaching me. When you enter into a coven, the goal is that you're not just a member. You're supposed to learn, advance in the ranks, and really eventually become a leader within your own coven to branch out. And it's not the same for all covens, but that's basically the ones that I've found around where I've lived, anywhere I've lived. And so, as a 15-year-old studying witchcraft, this was pretty impossible. I finally did go back to the coven that I had found the resources from, Temple of Ishtar, and as a witch that was still in the broom closet, I reached out to the high priest. I know that it's not pronounced Sebion, but I'm just going to call him Lord Sebion. And so I reached out to Lord Sebion and basically explained my situation. And again, this kind of comes back to the fact that when I started witchcraft, I did enter with a very elitist attitude. I felt like I was very learned and that I was very mature. And Lord Sebion, I feel, really fanned those flames when he read my message and he said, "Listen, I can tell that you have the great makings of a witch. I can tell that you have the great makings to even become an amazing high priestess someday. I feel that from you. However, you are still very young. Covens," he basically explained that, covens are full of adults, and, we do perform skyclad, which means, the rituals were done naked. He's like, even if we wear robes, we are naked underneath, therefore we cannot take you in, we cannot teach you. I'm sorry, but maybe when you're 16 with parental permission we might be able to, but that's about it. And when I told him that I would never get parental permission because it was not allowed, because my mom didn't know I was a witch and my dad did not really have custody of me, he kind of did the whole, well, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to wait until you're 18. And that really bothered me. I was really upset. For some odd reason, I almost felt like abandoned. I felt like he had just given up, and I felt like a religion that wanted to pass on its teachings should work harder for the ones that wanted to learn. And I really don't know why I was acting this way. I mean, teenagers, hormones, you could only guess. There's about 1 billion things that were going off in my brain. And I was a highly emotional teenager, so it could have been any number of things. However, he ended up sending me some lessons, and he said, listen, I'll send you our introductory course, send me the results, and, when you're 18, we'll definitely consider you. You'll have a spot here if you decide to join us. Which was great, and I was looking forward to it, and then it turned into a rebellious thing, whereas I was going to show him, and then later on down the line, as I was turning 16, and as I was getting ready towards 17, I decided in that moment that I was not going to join the Temple of Ishtar. His words that I would make a great high priestess had really stuck with me. And I decided that I could do better than the Temple of Ishtar. That I could start my own coven because I knew enough, because I had researched enough, because I was confident enough that I could become my own high priestess, find my own high priest, and that I would make the best coven, and that I would welcome people of all ages because we wouldn't, be skyclad. I would welcome people of all ages, and that I would teach them, and that I would be there for them because no one was there for me. And it does seem extreme, and at the time it was very extreme. Like, I look back now and it's very cringy, but you have to understand a religious journey for someone that has never fit in, when you finally find that nook, when you finally feel like you belong somewhere, and then you're being denied left and right. I couldn't come out to my mom because then there was the fear of her burning my stuff. My father was indifferent, and really, I didn't belong anywhere. My crush was already graduated now, and she didn't want to hear anything about me being a witch. I couldn't even get in contact with her anymore. Nobody else that I knew was a witch, and the people that knew that I was a witch, they either didn't care or they basically said that I was going to summon Satan and I was going to be dragged to hell. So I really just didn't feel like that people weren't taking me seriously. And I felt like I was just being thrown around between all these different people, these non-believers, shun them, I felt like I was just being totally disregarded in my knowledge and in my personal journey towards enlightenment, and I was insulted. So at the time, my resolve to start my own coven, to start my own group where people like me could belong, I felt like it was a very noble cause. It just ended up working out terribly in the end. I feel like we all have those moments that we regret, and mine is definitely looking back on when I decided that I was going to start my own coven. Around my senior year, I started to make other friends that were into the whole neo-paganism thing, neo-witchcraft, or whatever you wanted to call it, the New Age religions. And I had a lot of friends that were coming out as, pagans, there was a few druids, and then of course there were the Satanists, and a lot of my friends had turned from Christianity to Buddhism, even though I don't consider Buddhism pagan in any way. But it all just depends on how you want to define stuff, but we're not getting into that. But I found a lot of friends that had tried their alternate paths so that they could try and fit in somewhere, because obviously their Christian upbringing was not working for them personally. And so what happened around this time was I met a young couple. They were in my choir class, and they decided that they were madly in love. I'm a sucker for love. I'm a sucker for true romance. At the time, I had been in love with someone, I thought I was in love with someone who was long distance from me, and I dedicated my whole life to them, and I believed in soulmates and everything else. Not to say that I don't still believe in soulmates, but that's not important. However, I am a hopeless romantic, and so even though these people were young and I considered them highly naive, I was touched by their love story and by the fact that their parents were trying to keep them away. It was almost like a modern tale of Romeo and Juliet, just without poison and without other crazy things going on. But I sympathized for them. My love was taken from me, and so I was like, these two deserve to be together. Well, the male, he decided that he was also a witch. He said that he had studied it for a very long time and that he always wanted to be part of a coven. And this was my opportunity. I spoke to him about my want of being in a coven and how I was never allowed. And he said, you know what? We should start our own coven. And to me, the pieces just fit. I felt like this was destiny. This was what was going to happen. It was meant to be. I was finally going to be the head priestess that I was foretold to be by Lord Sebion. And it's kind of funny looking back on it now, but I decided that this was going to happen, and I started working like right away. I was in the mall, writing down passages, writing down spells, and even though they weren't really custom, they were more copy and pasted from Raymond Buckland's book, I felt confident. I was like, wow, this is going to be amazing. We already had 2 people lined up to be members, and I was like, you know what? This is a dream come true. Well, eventually the man that was supposed to be the high priest, I should say boy, that was going to be the high priest, he came up to me and he said, listen, you know I love so-and-so. And I was like, yes. And he's like, I know that we can't get married because she's too young. However, I would like to do a hand fasting ceremony. You know, you're not ordained, so it won't be totally official, but I want to go through the motions instead of giving her, you know, just a promise ring. I want to take it one step further. I want to do a hand fasting. I want to prove that my love is real and really dedicate myself to her. And I said, okay, you know, that's fine. And he was like, I would like you to perform it. Now, mind you, my dirty little secret at this point was not only that I was a closet witch, but it was also that I had never performed a single ritual in my life. I prayed every day. I did my daily devotions as I was supposed to. Well, most of the time. And I meditated, but I had never performed a ritual, mostly because I was embarrassed. I had no self-confidence, and the fact of skipping or dancing around a log or just doing that in general, highly embarrassed. Couldn't bring myself to do it. Plus, as a closet witch, it was going to be hard to sneak salt out of the house and go sprinkling it all over the yard. You know, anything that I did was being watched by my parents, and even if I wasn't being watched, the dogs would follow me, and like everything I did was gonna look suspicious. So basically I was like, and he's like, well, you can do it, right? And naturally I don't like to say no, so I decided that I was going to do it. Now, here's where I'm going to cut the story very short. Because it's still embarrassing to me, but I knew nothing. I had essential oils, and for some odd reason, I thought they were liquid incense, and I had poured them in a censer. I wrote out this love spell for them, I wrote out a poem for them, I took the hand fasting ceremony from Raymond Buckland and I tweaked it a little bit, and I called them out to my house because I lived on 10 acres, and there was a beautiful stump where I could perform the hand fasting. I had a ribbon ready, I had everything. Or so I thought. I take the couple up to a stump. I put a sword into the ground and have them hold it while I tie their hands together, and then I try and light the liquid incense in my censer since I didn't have any other incense, and it was too windy that even if I had incense, it probably wouldn't have burned. The liquid incense is not catching on fire, and so I'm like burning paper and putting it in there, I'm burning pieces of leaves and putting it in there, and I'm trying to get all this to work. Meanwhile, the sword is wibbling all over the place because of the wind. These people have their hair blowing in their face, and as I'm trying to read, there's trucks going by, a train going by. Like, anything that could have gone wrong did go wrong, and it just was not professional, it was not good, everything went to shit, pardon my French, and they just looked at each other like, why are we doing this? Like, the weather was crappy, nothing worked out, and everything was just a failure. I even messed up some of the passages. They couldn't remember the words they were going to say. We were just very ill prepared. Candles wouldn't stay lit. There was no circle. And it just kind of added on to the fact that I was embarrassed to do these rituals. And now I had really shown how immature I was and how naive I was. I wasn't confident enough to even do the hand fasting in its entirety. I ended up cutting it short. none of my supplies worked. And nowadays, I feel like it was almost a sign that I was not ready. And it really woke me up after that moment. They thanked me for the ritual. They thanked me for all that I had done for them. But I already knew that I had messed up. I already knew that it was embarrassing. And I knew in that moment that despite all my knowledge, despite how much I had read, despite how much I had studied, there was a reason I had not initiated myself as a witch. There was a reason that I had not done any rituals, and it's because I knew, and the forces above knew as well, I was not ready for it. And so in that moment, I had a bit of humility, and it was after that that I put down all the books, I put away all the candles, I set down all my papers, and I decided that not only was I not gonna have a coven, but that I really needed a break from witchcraft.